So raise your hand if you missed the first part of last class. Was everybody here? One, the majority of you were here then, the start of last class. So we'll quickly review just kind of like the context of the situation, what's going on between the US and in Cuba. Okay, do you recall some of this discussion from last class? What were we talking about? What's the topic? Anybody remember? Yeah, Taj.
The USS Maine.
Okay, what was the USS Maine?
Ship sent to Cuba by the US.
Yeah. What happened to the ship?
Blew up.
And why was that a big deal? Remember? What was going on? Hero.
Kind of like, there was like tight tensions between like Cuba and Spain and the US.
Okay. Why was there tight tension between the US and Spain? Do you guys remember anything about that?
Spain wanted Cuba, but so did we.
Okay. Yes. All right. But kind of the like factor that pushed the US to get involved, let's start there. Just a quick review, like quick 2-minute review about what's going on between the US, Cuba, and Spain. Okay. Here's a little pretext or context to what's the big event again of this unit, or I'm sorry, of this lesson? Remember? Imperialism, and then the first example we're studying is what? There's a war, remember? The Spanish-American War. And what we talked about was how that began, and then you're going to look at how yellow journalism or misinformation, fake news, exaggerated news stories that people created, over 120 years ago may or may not have led the US to war, okay? So quick background. Cuba was a colony of Spain, okay? Meaning Spain was in control of Cuba. We good? For several reasons, Cuban rebels and Cuban citizens start fighting for independence. They're tired of Spain. We talked a lot about this in terms of like imperialism, whether or not you would like being controlled by a country, correct? Do you remember this? And well, the Cubans at this point in like 1898 begin to get fed up with Spain and the control they have over Cuba. Spain responds harshly and violently, and they begin to set up like concentration camps in Cuba, okay? And this all gets the attention of the US. And why would the US care about what's going on in Cuba? Do you remember it all? From like that brief discussion? Yeah, Bennett.
Did they have like commerce set up there, like that trade?
Yeah, there was trade and commerce. We were making money off of and with the Cuba, okay? What else was it about Cuba in terms of its location to the United States? Was it far away? No. Is it really close?
96 miles.
90, okay, yeah. We talked about, somebody swam it. Remember this? It took like several days for this person to swim. So like, in terms of imperialism, we have an interest in terms of economics and like military or safety, okay? Like it serves us better to have Spain out of there. So we're looking for an opportunity, okay? And then like Hero, and I can't remember, Taj was talking about, we send this battleship down to the shores of Cuba and it blows up. And this is kind of where we stopped last class, okay? The Maine is this battleship that explodes in February of 1898. It's declared that we are gonna go to war in Cuba against Spain in April of 1898. So how many months later? 2 months. Okay, so what we're looking at and what your skill work or the assessment will focus on is looking at primary sources to determine the cause and effect of the explosion of the USS Maine, and then the essential question to determine how fake news or misinformation impacts society. You'll look specifically, how did the explosion of the USS Maine and fake news? You're gonna look at 2 news stories. how do you think, based on the difference in the stories, Americans would react and how that would push or propel us into war, okay? And then you're gonna extend, all right? We like to extend, think outside of the classroom. How does misinformation and fake news and these kinds of things that we talked a lot about last class, how does it truly impact society? Okay? So let's take a little review, recap of where we're at. All right? Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about the context to what you're gonna get into right now? Okay. Then let's take a look at your work that you're gonna get into right away, all right? Everybody, in the Schoology folder from last time, okay? And in the slides, you will notice there's 2 articles that you will read in order to kind of develop your own understanding of how misinformation or fake news may or may not have impacted the start of the Spanish-American War. The first source is from the New York Times. It's about 3/4 of a page. Neither of these are too overwhelming in terms of their length. That's not the point today, is reading critically in order to see how 2 different versions of an event coexist at the same time, okay? So the New York Times is generally, do people consider the New York Times generally reliable or not? I see some people shaking their heads, I see some people nodding their heads. Would you believe the New York Times to be a trustworthy or honest newspaper or report? What do you think? In general, yeah.
Yes,
Yes, why?
because it's a pretty credible source that's been around just forever.
Okay, because in general, the New York Times is what kind of news? Is it exaggerated or is it generally what? Is it factual in general? Historically, yes. The New York Times has been a historically factual newspaper. So that's the first source you'll take a look at. The second source you will look at in order to compare these 2 versions of the same event is from the New York Journal. The New York Journal was a publication by the gentleman we talked about last time, William Randolph Hearst, who was one of these media mogul types that began producing like over-exaggerated stories and things like that. What you're gonna do is, using this graphic organizer that you have access to, you are gonna compare the stories based on what happened to the USS Maine. That's where you're digging, that's where you're investigating, okay? So the organizer looks like this. You have document A and document B. First thing, according to the article, what happened to the Maine? I want you to describe in your own words how each article presents a different or maybe the same version of the same event. Second, I want you to tell me what information is included to support the version of the events that took place around the USS Maine. People, what you're going to notice is how supporting evidence and details, like we talk about a lot, become important to this analysis you're doing. Do they exist in both stories? Look for that specifically. And then lastly, in your opinion, which of these 2 articles would be more likely to energize people to support the Spanish-American War? What do you think I mean by energize? What does that mean? Somebody put it like, yeah, Cooper.
Like try to get the people support.
Okay, like rile people up.
Yeah.
Okay? Because we talked a lot about how the American people, if they're not interested or if they don't support something like going to war, it can be a huge hassle for leaders, okay? And on the contrary, if they support it, it makes things much simpler, okay? So which story do you think would be more energizing to people? Why do you think this? And then lastly, what do you think really happened to the Maine? Then you're gonna wrap this all up. Do you think that yellow journalism, fake news, misinformation, exaggerated stories was a contributing factor to the start of the Spanish-American War, in your opinion? Yes or no, and then why? What questions do you have? Yeah. Yes, you can work with the partner. Good question. Everybody, show of hands. Do we know where to find the articles? Everybody raise their hand, because if you don't, I will help you. Okay? Computer.
Oh, yeah, talk about that.
Okay. Does everybody know where to find the organizer? No? I'll come over there in a minute. Would anybody like paper copies of all this? I'm gonna put a timer up. You guys are gonna have 35 minutes to work. Again, these are short articles, work in pairs, discuss which information, which facts or non-facts are you reading that are different. What's interesting to me is how people can look at the exact same event and have two completely different stories about it, okay? See how those stories differ, what facts are in, what facts are not in, and then how that may have impacted the Spanish-American War. After 35 minutes, we'll discuss as a class, and then what we'll get into is the connection activity, where I'm gonna have you guys find an exaggerated news story headline, and you're gonna tell me about how you think it could potentially have impacted people in society. That's the last piece of this lesson, okay? It's pretty simple. It's two short articles that talk about this explosion. Okay, did that make sense? What happened is this battleship, big old, it was as big as 3 football fields. The president sent it down to Cuba, okay, in order to basically intimidate Spain, because Spain was doing a lot of bad things in Cuba. All right. So they send this battleship down, and then within a month, blows up and kills a bunch of people and sinks to the bottom of the Havana Harbor, the water. Okay, so it's kind of a big deal. Nobody knows what happened really to this battleship, but the United States and the president at the time, President McKinley, used it in order to basically start a war. Okay, the Spanish-American War, because people got really riled up. People were like, "Oh, okay." So these articles tell two different versions of the exact same story. Which one would be more likely to lead people to want to go to war? That's the gist of it. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, guys, I'm printing. Are you sure you don't? Anybody want a paper copy of the organizer?